Hey guys, my name's William Chadwick, setup engineer and manager for Hymo Setups. I'm going to take you through today a comprehensive guide of how to adapt the ride heights in any road vehicle that has an open setup series. This is important for many reasons. Sometimes you'll run a league race where your car's got 5 to 10 kilograms more balance of performance than what it would normally have in an official series, therefore your setup fails tech. You may want to make a small balance change to improve the rotation a little bit, reduce the rotation a little bit, and this can be really well manipulated by just the rear ride height. And I'm going to take you through the 10 different categories of how to adjust these ride heights and kind of what to look for and what not to do in order to keep the balance of your car good. And yeah, let's get into it. Okay, so here we are for our first category, GT3 cars. Now, GT3 cars have their own sort of ride height system. It's been like this since like the start of 2025, and I'm going to take you through all the nuances with this sort of category of ride height adjustment. So, as you can see here, this is just a baseline setup, and it's running quite high at the front. Now, something you'd want to do is always kind of run minimum ride height at the front. And you can see this by where your ride height indicators on the front left and front right are. So you would lower this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. As you can tell, there you go, I can't even count. You can see that you've done it equally by looking at the front corner weights. Now, 17 newtons wouldn't make a massive difference when it comes to corner weights. But if you started to get quite off with this and you got a little bit lost when you were trying to lower these ride heights and just mess around with them a little bit, you can get quite a few newtons off. So it's important just to keep an eye on that. And you want to run pretty much as low as possible. Now, for example, maybe then we were on the limit of the ride height. You can see that in the Porsche, the fuel makes a massive difference to this front ride height. But you were running a league and they gave you 5 kilos of BOP. You're then under the limit. So in order to adapt that, you would just raise the front like that, but equal on both sides, and never really using anything such as bump rubbers. This will do absolutely nothing, or more importantly, spring rates. As you can see, spring rates will change your ride heights in an adverse effect, but it'll massively adapt the balance of your car. And you know, when we publish setups, spring rates are a huge thing to how the car handles, and I recommend do not touch them whatsoever. Another thing we can look at, which is relevant in these GT3 cars, is something you see here called center front splitter height. Now, although these ride heights here are legal, you could be fouling on the front splitter. And cases where this would happen would be when you're running a high rake setup. Some reasons for running a high rake setup and why we do it sometimes is the diffuser in some cars operates at this sort of range where it's quite a high rake setup, so the diffuser's more efficient there and it just works better. You can have it just for balance reasons. Maybe you were running a really high wing, so you're having to force the car to rotate with more natural rake across the car, so the difference between the front and the rear ride height. And just generally, it's a tool you can use to adapt how your car drives. If you're in the working range already, a small increase will minorly affect how the car is balanced and give you slightly more rotation, and therefore a small decrease would give you slightly less rotation in the mid-corner area. So if I up this front ride height a lot, you'll see it does a few things, and I'm going to try and make sure I get it balanced, but you'll see it's very easy to lose it. If I get this up to the high 70s, and then balance it off as we get close to each other, you see I'm paying attention to those corner weights to make sure that we are legal. You can see that we're now failing this front splitter ride height, or front splitter height I should say, but legal on the ride heights. Now, all you do to fix this is just raise your ride heights. And just because these aren't close to minimum, as long as that front splitter is as low as possible, you're going to be generating the most front downforce you can, and in pretty much every scenario, that's what we want to do. So that's just something to note. Another thing, just for a small tip, you can see that here when we've done this, you can see the cambers have changed quite a bit. So you would readjust your cambers to where they were, and then you'd also readjust your toe to minimum. There's never really a case where you're having your toe above minimum in a GT3 car. So there you go, that's how you'd adapt it back. But they're pretty self-explanatory. And that is GT3 ride heights covered. The next class that we're going to look at is GTP, excluding the 963 GTP, alongside the Formula 3 car that also applies in this GTP section because it adapts in the same way. If we go to our setup sheet, you will see that this is kind of a lot more complicated than most cars, and there's a lot of different ways that you can adapt this front ride height. I'll give you an example. You can change these turns, you can change the heave deflection, and that'll change your ride heights. You can adapt the diameter of these torsion bars. Now, this is where it gets really important. What we often do with these cars is we set up the heave spring deflections, or third spring, whatever you want to call it, in a certain way to potentially improve the car's ride height at speed. It can have a lot of different effects, right? And it can be very, very sensitive to having the deflection changed of the spring. Now, if you're changing these heave perch offsets to adapt these ride heights, you're going to be adjusting this deflection, and you could fire this car way out of its setup window with just a small, tiny ride height change. Again, another thing that will adapt the way the car feels. Your torsion bar turns will adapt the way the car feels more than just a ride height perspective. So I'd advise staying away from these alongside the diameter as well. So your main way to change ride heights in this type of car, including the Formula 3, is your push rod length delta offset. Now, as you can see, I've used this for many a time. Put it to 10 kilos. You can see you're failing. Bam. Oh, well, bam. You change it back. Now, if you want to make a very small change to the front, it is possible to change these turns by 1 or 2 clicks to get it closer to minimum ride height at the front. Just be careful. It can massively affect the balance of your car, and I just keep in mind, if you have done this to like slightly reduce this, let's say to 82, just down by 1 on both sides, just be aware this can affect the handling of the car quite significantly, and I'd be aware when you go back to this that you could maybe have to change it back. But keep that in mind for when you're adapting these setups. Same goes for the back. Again, just changing the push rod length offset, length delta, whatever it's called in the setup page of this car, and that'll have you hopefully up and running in the GTP class and the Dallara Formula 3 car. The Porsche 963 shares a category just to itself, and I'll explain that just by going through this garage page now. Now, very similar to how you'd adjust the GTPs. Again, making sure we don't look at stuff like the heave perch offset really as a main way to change your front ride height. Like I say, you know, we go down to the whole, well, let's put 10 kilos on the front. As you can see, with Feltec. Using this push rod length offset to adapt the front ride height is your main tool. Again, you can maybe slightly and minorly adjust with the heave perch offset, but it's not advised, and I wouldn't do it. It could completely mess up the car. Now, it also has a roll spring, but this won't be affecting this at all, as you can see just by that then. The way this car differs mainly, other than the fact it has roll springs, and it calls it a third spring at the back and not a heave spring, whatever, right? Is that at the back you use the spring perch offset. Again, not adapting your spring rates. Some cars do have spring rates. I think the BM also has spring rates to adapt, but what you want to be using here is your spring perch offset at the back or your push rod length offset. Now, as you can see, the spring perch offset does minorly change your spring deflection. However, you know, your push rod length doesn't do that, but it's just another option that you have to adjust maybe in a more fine way potentially, or if you're looking at corner, maybe doing slight cross weighting, but I'd advise against doing it if you weren't really sure what you wanted to achieve. And as you can see there, you can even end up failing on your shock deflections. So just be careful of that with this, and again, mainly using the push rod length offset when you can to adapt your ride heights. So this category covers almost every car. There's a long list. I will put it on screen of every car that this covers. Lotus 49, Lotus 79, GT4, TCR, Porsche Cup. There's a lot of other cars as well. A lot of the classic race cars like the HPD, the GT1s, the GT2, they're all covered by this, and it's important to understand how this works, and this is what used to cover the GT3s as well. We go to garage, you can see it's just the spring perch offset. Like we've touched on before, adapting this, you've got no deflection numbers to worry about. You can just adapt your ride heights by changing your spring perch offset, both front and rear. Most cars, but not all, just like this Porsche, will have a spring rate on the front and the rear. You can, or the spring rate will change your ride height, but I highly advise against it. When adapting these ride heights, you need to make sure that you're doing it equally both sides. This is fairly easy to do in these sorts of cars because you get a number which is the same, whichever way you look at it. So you just make sure that this number is always the same as this number, unless you're purposefully going for some sort of corner weight difference, maybe just to get the nose a little bit lower. Maybe that's what the original setup was already on. For whatever reason, for example, something like that would be a little bit closer to your minimum ride heights, where you're using the camber slightly to adapt the ride height. But yeah, that's the majority of all race cars on iRacing in the road section are using this spring perch offset, and it's fairly self-explanatory. Just make sure you're not using the spring rates to adapt your ride heights or major like camber changes, for example, because this can affect the grip that you have. Although camber changes are very minimal and don't make a huge difference, it is still important to be using this spring perch offset to adapt your ride heights both front and rear. Another car with a category by itself is the Dallara LMP2 car, still used quite a lot across iRacing in IMSA, and yeah, it's slightly different. The main way that you're adapting the ride height in this car is just using the turns of the torsion bar, the front. This is your main way of adapting the ride heights in this car. You can't use the heave spring gap. That does literally nothing to your ride heights. Same at the rear as well. Third spring gap, what it says at the back. Do not be using your spring rates at the back to adjust your ride heights. Please use your spring perch offset that you get at the back of this car in order to do this, and just be aware of making sure it's the same both on both sides, like we talked about in some of the other cars that have this sort of arrangement. And yeah, you've got your torsion bar turns at the front and your spring perch offset at the back for the Dallara LMP2 car. Another car to touch on is the LMP3 car. This car has its primary adjustment from push rod length adjustment, or ADJ as they abbreviate it to. This is your main control over the front of the car and the back of the car. You have your third perch offset and your heave perch offset, but again, avoid using these to keep the deflections in the same sort of range. Again, also avoid kind of using the spring perch offset. Use it as like a secondary measure to refine your ride height last little bit potentially, because again, we want to just pay attention to our spring deflection, and that is important. It's important also to mention this car is naturally unbalanced. It's not cross-weighted, as you can see here. We've got over 1,000 newtons of difference. This is usually accounted for by about 1 mil of difference on the spring perch offset, as you can see here, having the ride heights level and balanced, but you're never going to get the corner weights to be identical in this car. It's just a quirk of the LMP3, and I wouldn't worry about it too much because the setups already have factored in that sort of handling characteristic, and yeah, that's the LMP3 for you. Another category of car is the Mercedes F1 cars, both the W13 and the W12. These operate in a similar manner to the GT3s, and the ride height control is a little bit like what you get on GT3s, this sort of number that you click up and down, much simpler than a GT3 because you don't do it per corner. But yeah, again, just editing this up and down. If you were to fail on the front and you wanted to get it closer, potentially you could adapt the cambers, which would make a small difference to the ride height. That's what I'd use kind of if you were wanting to make small differences under the 0.3 that you see here is the jumps. You can also adjust the rear slightly to adjust your front ride height if you want to. Again, quite minor. Mainly I'd be using these. You might want to increase it because of bottoming and curbs. And yeah, the one thing I wouldn't touch whatsoever is heave rates. So as you can see, if I increase the heave on the front, you can see it changes it by 0.1. decrease it, you can see it, you can get it to a minimum value, but this heave rate is going to massively affect the way the car handles. And again, if you're picking a setup up for this car, I wouldn't really be touching that unless you understood really what this heave, or sometimes referred to as a third spring, is doing, because they can't be quite sensitive. So I'd just be careful with that. And that's all you really need to know for these F1 cars. Very, very simple. Again, just a clicker, a bit like the GT3s, not even having to worry about corner weights in this case. Our next category is just for the Super Formula Light. If we go into the garage, you can see why we've got the push rod length offset, but they call it P rod length offset for whatever reason. You see making quite aggressive changes. Similar to the GTPs, you can make smaller changes with your torsion bar preload and changing that very slightly. But again, I advise against it because of the implications it can have on balance. You can always go maybe one click on the camber to change your ride heights very minimally, but just be aware that can still affect the handling, even if it doesn't look like a big difference. The main difference for this Super Formula Light is you also have spring perch offset on the back, alongside the push rod length offset that you see here at the rear section. Again, I'd prioritize using this, but if you wanna, or you feel like it's necessary to use the spring perch offset, for example, maybe you went and fouled the deflection and the deflection failed and you went red on these, like we saw before with the GTPs failing the spring deflection. But again, priority using your push rod or P rod length offset in the Super Formula Light, and not touching your third or your heave spring, depending on what it wants to call it. And yeah, you can use this maybe for smaller stuff, but again, could adversely affect the handling of the car. And sometimes it's very specific on what sort of deflection we're using to get the result and the performance out of the car. So just be careful of this if you are going to use it for minor changes. Let's say that you were slightly under and you decided to go like that, for example. But yeah, I try and avoid it at most costs. We now move on to the IndyCar and the Super Formula car. This is, again, a similar thing, but in a slightly different way. So I just thought I'd separate the categories up. Like we always say, you know, you could have the ride height fail or something like this. There you see the third spring gap fail, but that's pretty easy to adjust if required with the slider. But for example, if you were to go under the front ride height limits, you've got this push rod length section, not offset, not delta, just push rod length, and it gives you a big number. Again, this can change, obviously, if you're in the metric system, or not in the metric system, I should say, and it's a case of just adapting these accordingly, just pushing it up and down, and making sure you're going equal on both sides, keeping the corner weights the same, unless the setup is already on a cross weight. I'd always just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, just like that. Again, changing the rear is exactly the same. It's a case of going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, keeping the corner weights the same, the cross weight the same, and yeah, this is the method on these two cars, named the same way. Again, making sure not to adapt your spring rates because that would adversely affect the way the car handles. Two more configurations of cars to look at. We're going to look at the USF 2000, and also by doing that, we're looking at the Indy Pro PM18 as well. They work in the exact same way each. Our primary tool to change is our push rod offset. That is on both sides here, as you can see. For changing the front ride heights, you have to click it equally each side. And you've also got your spring perch. Use your spring perch as a secondary adjustment over using the push rod offsets. You want to use that primarily because this doesn't really affect as much as the spring perch does, but you can use these two instead of using anything like the spring rate. So please don't use that. Use the push rod offset and make sure you're doing it equal on both sides when adjusting. Same for the back of the car, equal on both sides when adjusting. And yeah, the same for the spring perch offset as well, if you're adjusting that as like a secondary tool to ensure that you get the ride height you want to do, whether you want to adjust The rear ray can increase it a little bit for some more rotation, decrease it for some less rotation, or if you're just trying to fit into the tech inspection and make sure that you're passing tech. Our next category is the Formula FF1600, Formula Ray, whatever you want to call it, and the Formula 4 car. Now, if we look at the garage screen in the chassis section, you can adapt your ride heights by the push rod length offset, or it calls it push rod offset in this page, for example. I've even seen it abbreviated to P rod as well, so just be aware of that. But means the same things. This is just the push rod offset. That's all that you can change in this car, and you've got nothing to look at such as spring perch or the third springs. These cars don't have third springs, both the Formula 4 and the Formula Ray, or whatever you want to call it. So just using these push rod offsets to adapt your front and rear ride heights how you want to. And again, just be aware of these limits and just make sure you stay above them. And yeah, you can adapt this rear ride height to increase or decrease rotation, remembering that increasing the rake, so the difference between the front and the rear, so going up on this number will usually increase rotation, and going down will usually decrease rotation in sort of the mid-corner area. And just remember to always reset your toes once you've done that, and reset your cambers to wherever they were beforehand. There you go. Another car that decides it wants to sit in its own category is the Ford GT GTE car. Still active in many series, and the way of adapting the ride heights in this car specifically, it's important to mention that all the other GTEs are just spring perch offset cars, is the torsion bar preload. So up and down on your torsion bar preload to adjust. Again, keeping the number the same each side to just make sure that your crossweights are the same. And that's how you adapt your ride height on this car as well. And that concludes what we're looking at today in terms of how to adapt your ride heights in pretty much every car on iRacing. Cars that I haven't touched on that you might kind of want to know about is stuff like the old LMP1 cars potentially. They're extremely complicated cars, which I haven't touched on in terms of their ride height adjustment, or any other real legacy car like an older GT3 car which doesn't no longer race, or an older V8 supercar, for example. This is everything that's current and being raced in iRacing, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you found it useful. Please remember to like, subscribe to the channel if you want to. You can get our setups, the link via the description below. We make setups weekly for a lot of weekly series in the roadside of iRacing. And yeah, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Any vehicle in road which has